start then. I think it's 7 o'clock and all's well, everybody's here, so we could make a start. Just before we start the meeting, we have of course all been trained in at least the days, either this morning or was it Monday that we were in? Tuesday. I would like to perhaps incorporate anything that came out of that meeting, you know, into what we do in the future. Just before the meeting, Councillor Gray and I were just having a word. What we took out of it from our group was very much that we don't get the information early enough to, you know, and I'm sort of telling all the officers that this sort of came out, and I was going to raise it at the coordinating board, and Councillor Gray raised the point.
That the coordinating board is not very visible. We don't know what they're doing. We don't have the feedback in terms of the things that they're doing, and I think that would be a great help, not just for us, but perhaps for the rest of the council as well.
Because what I was going to raise at the board, and then hopefully pass on to you under the new arrangements, was the fact that, you know, the trainer did stress very much that scrutiny only works if the executive and senior officers take it seriously. You know, it's got to have its role defined and appreciated. So I think we've got a way to go, but I thought, I hope everybody else found it very useful from that point of view. The important thing is to take the training forward now as we go forward. Yes.
I was just saying, one of the other things about the scrutiny was whether or not on the coordinating board they would have any opportunity for other councillors to go in, you know, like a session, to go in and people be able to raise topics that potentially could be put forward to scrutiny. And the other thing that they said was that when we do the ONS meetings, one of the other things that was discussed was of having the work programme high up the agenda.
No, you've jumped the agenda points. That's
yes. Right.
Yasmin's point at the end. So
oh, good.
we've made notes
like
of
a good
everything.
idea.
Okay then, so we'll incorporate anything from that or from the training as we go through the agenda. So start with the minutes, Kim.
Yeah, so the minutes of the meeting were on the table. I'm quite sure you've all thoroughly read them through from the last meeting. Are you happy to accept them as a correct record?
I'll sign them later.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Apologies for absence.
Received an apology from absence from Councillor Michaela Martin at the last minute. Unfortunately, her father was taken to A&E earlier, so she's unable to attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest before the meeting?
I haven't received any before the meeting, Chair.
And any questions from members of the public?
Not from members of the public, Chair.
Right, we do have one question from a member. We have the question written out, we've all got a copy, and the answer. Councillor Edmonds, do you wish to ask a supplementary, or? I don't want to get into great depth.
No, there's no supplementary, we can discuss it whenever.
Right. My attitude to this is just quite simply that we have two other groups looking at air quality, and I don't really want this committee to get wedded in the detail. I think it's a very important issue. I can't say how important I think it is, but you know, when you get into the detail at this committee, I think that's really for the other room.
My response is probably the most important issue in the environment that we've got.
It is, but we do have two working groups working on it.
Right, I'm not aware of them, unfortunately, Mr. Chair.
Right.
I haven't got the feedback, haven't got the information, and I really need to protect the citizens of Farnham, which is why I asked the question.
You certainly do, and you've got your answer, and I can assure you that perhaps, yes, I was just going to say, perhaps
But if Councillor Edmonds wants to come in and talk to us in more depth and more detail, we're quite happy to do that.
Yes, my email was shut down because I lost it. So I only got the response today,
Right.
but I certainly will be following up on the issue.
But you're welcome to come in and meet the officers who are
Okay, sure.
involved in
Thank
air
you.
quality and have a deeper discussion with them.
Sure, thanks.
And we should have some feedback from those groups through this committee.
Good.
You know, we're not ignoring it completely,
Okay.
but we're not going to debate the detail here because that's being debated in the, I'm assuming it's being debated in the specific groups. So, which moves on to our service plans. Now this is going to be quite meaty, so if we could try and be very focused. Louise, are you going to introduce this first?
Thank you, Jen. Very, very briefly. I just want to say, having had the training that you alluded to this week and last week, I think service plans are a really important opportunity for ONS members to appreciate and understand the breadth of activities that are taking place in the different service areas under your committee. You'll see from the service plans that there are outcomes, the headings and the various activities underneath that will produce that outcome, and they are reported in the performance report that you get each meeting on a quarterly basis. So they're done by exception, so if things if they are going well, you won't see too many of the things that are dropping out of here. But if there are any problems, you will have those reported into your meetings when the targets have been missed. It's also, I think, a really useful source for your work programme coming forward as well. So you'll get an idea of all the things that are happening, and you might think, oh, that looks interesting, can we hear a bit more about that? So I think they're a very useful source of information.
Because again, one thing I think that came out of the training was just recently, we haven't had any information really in advance, you know, and I'm not blaming the executive, it's a new executive, they're finding their feet. But the trainer did say, you know, we should know a year in advance really what the executive's going to be doing, not, you know, a couple of weeks, so that we can actually have some useful input. So it was all very much from the same sort of point of view. Give us the information and then scrutinise it properly. So Zach, welcome.
Thank you.
You must wonder what you've come into. We could have put this one out of order, but as you're going to do two more as well, at least you're going to have a break while we do the other service plans. So if you'd like to introduce the first one, the planning service plan, give us a...
Absolutely. I'll keep it very brief because I know it's a lot on the agenda tonight. I would also say that obviously the service plans were prepared, the draft service plans were prepared before I joined, so there may be things in here. In fact, there's a couple of points I would like to put to ONS to see if they would consider a couple of additional actions. But also I'd like to point out that I have noticed there are quite a few typos, which I'm sure members will have picked up on, and I'll go through those as well, just so that we pick those up. So in terms of, just going to concentrate on development management and planning policy for this ONS, because economic development will be considered under next week's value for money overview and scrutiny committee. But in terms of the development management, I think the messages are around improving customer service. So it's about improving our response times and our validation times for planning applications. It's about meeting our KPIs for determining planning applications, and obviously that's very much linked to delivering development within the borough and improving customer service. There are actions relating to, members may be aware that we're looking to, as a council, to introduce a customer service centre over the next year, and that will have an implication in terms of the planning service, because as a forward-facing service with a lot of customer interactions, it's going to be imperative that the planning service is not denigrated by that. In fact, there's opportunities there to enhance the service we get to give to people, particularly in terms of self-help and the advice we provide. In terms of the key outcomes, in terms of business as usual, they're the usual ones you expect, that we meet as I say, the national standards for speed and quality of decisions, and in terms of quality, I will refer members to the agenda item later on appeals, and so I wasn't going to talk to that now. But in terms of speed, we do have targets set out for major, minor and other applications set out by central government, and we are monitored on those on a quarterly basis nationally. And I think there's always room for improvement there, and working hard with Beth to make sure that we give timely decisions, because it's important to the economy. The validation, as I touched on, is important, because to meet those targets, it's important that we can process applications in time. Those applications where information is missing or is not going to help the decision-making process, we should pick up on those quickly and take appropriate action. In terms of enforcement, that's the other sort of key area, and it is about responding to complaints in a reasonable timescale in accordance with our enforcement action plan, and to be reactive to those, particularly those urgent items around listed buildings and trees, etc. We are looking to review the planning enforcement plan and publish a new enforcement plan that's updated and again meets members' requirements. And obviously related to all of these matters are the training sessions. I would like very much to investigate opportunities to take advantage of external training where possible for members and officers. Appreciate there are budget constraints, but there are certainly companies out there who will come and give us advice. I was exploring an opportunity for County Council to come, so the biodiversity manager at County Council, I've already talked to one of the councillors, will come and give us a talk about licensing and for newts and other protected species and biodiversity, and I think there's a lot of learning there, both for officers and members, that can only improve our decision-making process. In terms of recruitment, we do struggle with certain posts, but I'm pleased to say that Beth and her team have managed to keep us afloat in terms of our staffing numbers, and credit due there, but we do need to streamline that and make better use of the resources we've got. And obviously, as part of the budget savings, we will need to look carefully at where our resources are best used. In terms of planning policy, I think the key...
Should we just have a break there, give you a
Sorry.
break and
Yeah.
give us a break, and just see if anybody wishes to add anything to what's here or make any comment? Councillor Evans and then Councillor Rivers.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
You referred to the developers as customers. The residents that are affected by development, how do you refer to them?
I refer to everyone as a customer. Everyone who has an interaction with the planning service is a customer.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Councillor Rivers?
Zach, forgive me for being picky,
Mm-hmm.
but where we see as above in here on this table, if I were to have this as a spreadsheet and be filtering on things,
Yeah.
I wouldn't see as above.
Yeah.
Can you just put
We
text in?
will impose the
Thank
text.
you.
Yes, absolutely.
No,
That's a very good point.
it is a good point, because of course it might affect you, but it affects everybody else, all the customers.
Absolutely.
Councillor Townsend?
Just one thing, on the table itself, the format of the table where it says actions and outputs, I'm looking at other service plans, there's some targets put on them, and some of these, you know, the action, is it an action, and what is the output? Sometimes it's, you know, it's sort of that there's not much information there, whether it would be helpful to have some kind of measurable target. So, you know,
Yeah.
you say something about the appeals and about you know, something about poor performance, but we don't know what that threshold is to,
Of course.
you know, and things like that. So it would be really helpful just to have a small sort of written target there that we could then think, you know, we could then question and say, are we near that,
Yeah.
are we far away from it, etc.
I think I'm in agreement with you, and I'm not criticising my predecessor,
No,
but I
no,
think
no.
some of these targets could be what we would refer to as more SMARTs, those specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and
Yeah.
time-bound. Certainly for this, things like the KPIs are met for speed and quality and decision. I think we could certainly outline what our targets are, and then they could be more challenged, because just to refer to those, as you say, as people observing this who may not necessarily always be in the planning field, you may not be aware of what those targets are. So I think that's a very valid point, and I'm happy to revisit the targets and try and make them a bit more smart if the committee agree.
No, I think that would be good. Councillor
Thank you.
Gray, then Councillor Else.
Okay, I mean, going back to the KPIs, and it runs through a number of these reports. I think it would be important where you're actually identifying that you want to improve on a KPI, or you're accepting the same without, I mean, I don't think we necessarily want to have every single KPI in the report, or at least a copy of the KPIs at the back, but the important thing is which ones are you going to improve on?
Yes.
Which ones are you struggling to maintain, and therefore you're putting the effort in to maintain them?
Yes.
I think the two other things that goes across it, that perhaps concerns me is that there's an efficiency target being applied across service levels, and there's also a business improvement programme going through. We don't see any reference to that or the effects of it within your service plan that I can find, and if I've missed it, my apologies.
No, it's a valid point.
I mean, they're quite important, especially in the planning area,
Yeah,
and they are disruptive.
yes.
I mean, things like, well, you're going to throw a new system in here, you're going to turn everything on its head over there, and you're going to save 20%, and by the way, we're going to just continue as we are at the moment.
No, I think that's a valid point, and there are some areas that are corporates that such as the customer service centre and some of the IT improvements that are being rolled out, that will have certainly have an impact, and maybe that could be drawn out more in the service plan before it goes on to the next stage. So thank you for your suggestions. I'll certainly look into that.
Thank you, Chairman. I just would like to comment that this is not measurable in any way, and so we don't ever see, or we have in the past, I'm sure, but we don't see this time last year's service plan. We don't know whether actions and outputs were achieved. We have nothing to measure this by, and I think that would be really interesting. So how do we know how planning are performing, whether there are, for me it raises more questions than gives answers. I just find that the outputs are rather, well, there's no detail to them. It doesn't tell us how you're going to achieve the outputs in any way, really anywhere. You're going to do these things, but you don't tell us how. And the impact of not completing the action is quite sort of obvious and not in any sort of depth. Anyway, for me, I'm not really seeing enough information here for me to form an opinion on how you're doing, really.
Understood. Yeah. Absolutely.
What was that? So it's terrible that they're being criticised for somebody else's work. But,
Sorry.
but if you could take all those points.
I would point out the first typo as well, which is the end date under outcome 1. The first outcome, it does say 2020, it should say 21. Sorry.
Where?
Or does it say 21?
It does say 21.
Oh right, sorry, I've got an old.
It's been changed by
Thank
for
you.
you.
That's right.
Okay, everyone quite happy if we move on to the policy?
Yeah. Can I just make one general comment, and it's about end dates. There does appear to be a general thing to actually either the description is wrong or the start and end date. What you're basically saying, this is going to happen all the way year long. There's no end, there's no early date on this. It's all year. And that's either a problem with you setting the date times or in describing the action.
Well, some of the outcomes are for the life of the plan, aren't they, to the 23?
Well, there must be something they're going to achieve by March.
Well, they're not all 20. They're not all 23, is what I'm saying, as far as I know. You know, there are others which are not like the enforcement plan and that sort of thing. The date is much sooner. Yes,
I think, Chair, through you, I think it's a valid point. I think this year, I believe in previous years, the council has been doing yearly service plans, but we've gone to a 3-yearly one. But I certainly, for business as usual, I think some of them will be necessarily because it's ongoing aims of targets. But where there are specific projects or specific pieces of work that need to be done, certainly we could be more specific about the dates, because just to say within the next 3 years doesn't really help you, and I totally appreciate that and understand that, and I'll have a look at that before it's taken on to the next phase. So it's a point well made.
Lovely. So can we?
Can I just raise one more thing?
Yes.
Page 25, I think it's lovely going backwards, but you've got some things down there, 17.3, 17.4, 17.5.
We haven't reached 25 yet.
I do apologise.
Yeah, let's do policy and then we'll take it during policy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Everyone quite happy if we ask that to move on to policies?
Okay. the key aim for policy this year is around the local plan part 2. Graham Parrott's here, who's my policy manager, and he's going to speak to that under a separate agenda item and give you a bit of an update. But certainly we are working to bring forward as soon as we can the consultation draft, and we want to take that through the necessary stages, and that will obviously come to ONS first, then on to executive, then on to full council. But I won't steal Graham's thunder there. But certainly that is one of the key aims for this year. Another one is obviously in the last 12 months we've adopted the SIL charging schedule, and we're sort of bedding in, starting to get receipts, and it is about understanding the best way to use those and coming up with the that we're recording them, that we're not missing out on SIL, but also that we come to an agreement about how that's best going to be spent. In terms of SIL, I have put here that we, perhaps one of the actions that I would be doing, under SIL, would be, I think we should have mentioned the annual infrastructure funding statement. This is a new standard statement that we're required to do on an annual basis. It's not just about SIL, but it's about Section 106 receipts as well. So I would be suggesting that a further sub-action of PR20P 17.4, that's under outcome 17. I would suggest that we mention that we would produce the annual infrastructure funding statement, and that is an ongoing thing we have to do. We will, within the 3 years, need to look at the SIL charging schedule and the amounts. I think it's too early to say at the moment whether or not our SIL charges, albeit I know they are high compared to many authorities in the country, we don't know what the impacts of that have been in terms of bringing forward development. But there was a recommendation from the SIL inspector in accepting our SIL charging schedule that we should do complete a review of the charging schedule. So I think we should actually put in an estimated date for that as a more smart target. And then finally, one thing that we probably need to look at as well in connection with that is looking at revisiting or introducing a planning obligations supplementary planning document, which sets out how we're going to collect and what we're going to do and the process for that. So that would be another action that, subject to members and the committee agreeing, I think that would make sense as a further smart action within the time period. And then, there was one. So the local plan, going back to the local plan policy, local plan part 2. One of the things we've been charged with since the climate change emergency was announced was looking at those policies and updating them and seeing if there's opportunities to actually have policies which address sort of zero carbon and look at that. And in connection with that, I would suggest that a further target would be to develop climate change SPD. So a supplementary planning document that would sit with the local plan, but would put the meat on the bones, as it were. And the timetable for that, I've talked to Graham and his team. We think obviously the key thing is to get the local plan policies, part 2 policies adopted first, but we would aim to roll that out in the following year, so from April 21, and get that adopted by March 22. Subject to committee's approval. I think in terms of policy, those were the sort of the key points, although I would point out that the dates have gone a bit awry under outcome 17 particularly. Oh, I might as well point them all out actually. So under outcome 14 and 13, for some reason we've got 2010 written in a couple of them, under 13.5 and 14.2. That should have obviously been 20. Apologies, members. Then under 16.2, under outcome 16, which is about neighbourhood plans, it should be 20 as a start date, not 23. Then on Outcome 17, we've got several end dates, so we've got 21st of March 20 under 17.2, which would be 23. 17.3 should be 20 and 23. 17.4 should be 20. 17.5 should be 20. And I shall be writing to Mr. Berry, so
I think we can safely leave that to you and say that this committee
apologies.
recommends that you have a thorough look at the dates and get them.
Apologies,
But,
members.
no, that's fine. I think we've all been champions of Local Plan Part 2, having been to schools across the borough. We know that the lack of sites identified counts against everything we do at Appeal. And the sooner we get some more sites, the better. The other thing that always intrigues me with, well, not intrigues me with policy, but we need to get our planning commissions through, but it does mean that everybody has to be on board. And you mentioned some training, whether it was in the other section or this one. I think it's so important with sort of applications and things that we actually all work really closely together on this, so that there's no nasty shocks when it comes into committee, and we're all with you in the aim of getting things through. And certainly with, I feel sometimes with neighbourhood planning is the one that comes to mind. As an authority, we don't really laud it in quite the way that we should. If you look on some other websites, they sort of sing the praises of neighbourhood planning and all the other communities of planning. And I think that strengthens our case if it's seen that we're very supportive of neighbourhood planning all the way through in our literature on our website, so that when we have got a neighbourhood plan and the developers QC is busy saying, oh well, what's neighbourhood planning, we've actually got something we can say, well, as a borough, we really do appreciate this local input into the planning policy.
I fully agree, and what the answer to what was the neighbourhood plan, it's part of the development plan when they were adopted, so decisions should be made in accordance with it. So it's absolutely crucial, and hopefully we have been supporting neighbourhood plans as a service, but certainly we'll continue to support them going forward as set out in the action.
And I'm not sure as it comes up anyway, Yasmin, you sent off the letter to John Ward at the last meeting here. John Ward, the leader, and I had been to see the MHCLG, and it was about two things. One, it was about housing delivery and how the heck do we deliver the housing when we get permission and they're not built. But it was also how, you have the inspectorate working borough-wide, where neighbourhood planning, obviously doesn't have to work borough-wide and doesn't have to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. So, basically, we need local plan Part 2, and then I'm hoping that when you've got local plan Part 1 adopted, neighbourhood plans made, and certainly local plan Part 2 further down the process, if not quite adopted, we will actually have a development plan that we can, stand by and say, well, enough. We don't want any more speculative stuff. But, it seems to have been a long time coming. I'm sure we've got lots of comments here. Take Councillor Townsend and Councillor Gray.
Just going back on the more local policies like the neighbourhood plan, design statements, and also the extensions SPD that we've got. I mean, we had an appeal today which was chucked out because of the extensions SPD that was referred to, and it's making sure that they are consistently referred to, I think, within our reports. And I'm not saying they're not always, but occasionally things do slip out, and it would be good to know that those documents were being referred to as sometimes to support refusal, but also to tune the actual application and make it something that local members probably prefer. But the thing that was in our last meeting here was that about a protocol for pre-apps, wasn't it, and how involving members and that.
Yes.
So again, that is kind of a policy, so having that protocol for pre-applications and involving the members, maybe members of the JPC obviously in that, then you don't get those surprises then when it actually comes to committee. So I think that's quite important as well. One tiny little thing is the strategic sites as well, is how they are being delivered, and the obviously I keep on my ones in Cranley, but it would be really good to be monitoring those and see how those strategic sites are delivering, what we're doing to try and force them to get them, encourage them to deliver, and you know, so that we can look at that as well. So that I think that would be really helpful to know how they're going.
I agree with you.
Thank you.
Councillor Gray?
Thank you. Neighbourhood plan, I'd like to see you have a target in that 4 neighbourhood plans will be completed by June, September, December, choose one. But actually, I think that there is a lack of target within planning and neighbourhood plans. There's a lack of pushing to say, lots and lots of questions, you're very responsive, but not so proactive. I think some of the neighbourhood plan areas need pushing. Certainly mine does, so I'll put my hand up, and it just needs holding into account. Otherwise, time just drifts on. That's a neighbourhood planning. The other comments on general comments apply. But one slightly more contentious is where we've got major sites. I do hope that we're learning our lessons. I hope we're going back and looking at the approval we've given and to see where we can make improvements. So certainly Dunsfold Park, a major omission in there was not putting any protections around the periphery. And if you go back to the museum application, all right, which is about the size of a 6 Boeing 707 aeroplanes that's actually gone on the periphery of the site, against partly the wishes of Dunsfold Park. We're supposed to have a museum, it's in the specifics, but the inspector said, well, you want a museum, this is a museum, it's not on the site, but it's against, and there's nothing in there that protects the area. And I think you should look at that, and you should also look at this consultation that's coming now at the moment on trees. The tree application, I've forgotten who's written it, but it's coming to the Forestry Commission, which is talking about the maintenance and management of the trees. But what it doesn't talk about is any enhanced planting. So I hope that when you're actually looking at these, you're looking at issues that come out of planning and you're feeding that back in, and you're being proactive with the developer as well as reactive, because I think there's some improvements we can make to the plan, with their agreement, of course, because they've already got planning permission. But with their agreement. And I think that might apply to other
I'm sure it does.
major
I'm
sites.
sure it does. Councillor Ells?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just wondering if there's a reason why we've got outcome 12 and outcome 17. SIL and S106 are kind of, well, there's this one SIL. I wonder whether it could be incorporated. It just makes it an easier document to read if we don't have a bit here and a bit there and a bit somewhere else. That was just a small thing. But there might be a reason why you've done that, a particular reason, I don't know. But if I may just go on, the other thing is that I think on outcome 11.2, monitoring existing and historical section 106 agreements, we know that there's a black hole that this money disappears into. I've had experience of that twice in my own ward. So I would like to see some recognition of that and some way in which you are going to make checks. How can I put this? I just think we need somehow to keep a closer eye on Surrey County Council and what they do with our S106 money. I mean, it does disappear, and it shouldn't. And just one other thing, please, if I may, Chairman. 17.1, timely implementation of infrastructure projects. How is this going to be achieved? This is, you know, it's a very sort of, it's a wish list, really, isn't it? Some of these things. And yes, how wonderful that would be, but how on earth?
I agree, it's not smart. It's not smart.
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was just thinking of the SIL website. We don't have a 106 on that, or do we?
Exicom.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the Exicom public facing module covers both
Does cover
SIL
both,
and
doesn't it?
Section 106. So you can go on there and find
Yeah.
out information about what's been secured through Section 106 agreements and whether we receive the money and that sort of thing.
Needs to be monitored very carefully.
Oh gosh, yes. No, I'm not.
Yes.
Sorry,
Through you, Chairman.
Yeah.
No, sorry. Through you. Obviously, we've got Graham Parrott here, who's our planning policy manager. You do have an officer who's currently monitoring SIL and Section 106. And yes, it's an important thing, so absolutely. If I can just pop back to the other points that were made. I think I've also got Beth Howard-Smith, who's our development manager here, and I'm sure she's heard the point about SPDs and the need to refer to those. Wherever we've got something that does support our case, we should use that. So I think that's a very valid point, and that can be something we can beef up in here. And the protocol for pre-apps and involving ward councillors, that's something I'm very supportive of. It was actually discussed at my interview about how that might work, and certainly it's referred to, albeit briefly, in the appeals paper later on the agenda, but it's something we're working on. We need to make sure that it's appropriate and that it protects members' rights, so they haven't been seen to, particularly those who sit on a committee, so they haven't been seen to prejudge an application. But I'm sure there's ways of tapping into that local knowledge and that expertise better at the pre-application stage, and I'm sure that's something that we'll be rolling out very shortly. So it's a very valid point.
I think most of us can hold our tongues, you know, what we think and what we say. We know when to, well, most of us know when to say it. Councillor Gray?
Thank you. Just 2 quick points, starting with the last one. Pre-apps do take into account that rural is slightly different to urban. An extension and ridge heights and everything else, which might be very mundane in urban environment, is actually quite critical. So some pre-apps and discussions have gone through without the councillor being involved. I've been told it's because it was insignificant. Well, it's actually not insignificant in a local area. The other thing is that you've got an excellent Section 106 officer, and you've got excellent information that comes out there on the 106s and the status of it, and I can drill down and actually look at the original document. Fantastic, right? Compliment you on that. Can we take that a little bit further? Because you're now being quite aggressive. When the money goes to the parishes to spend, you're giving them a document which says, I promise I will honestly do this, and if I fail, I'll give you all the money back. Super. Can you do that for Surrey County Council as well? Because you're responsible. When you give them the money, get them to sign that they will, and if they vary from that, and they should have a completion certificate which says, and you should give them a timing which says, this is 3 years. If you're not using it within 3 years, come back and renew it. Right? Because really, we are probably breaching our own rules associated with that when we approve the application.
Absolutely.
Because you give the planning application, then you just add, you give the money to Surrey, and Surrey, they're part of the club, and you don't question them.
Understood.
Except Graham does, and I know there are instances.
Well, what I was going to say very quickly is obviously the bespoke Section 106 agreements we have on schemes, the county are often a party to the agreement, so actually we don't actually get the money, because so I'm not saying, I mean, it's still important for us to try and understand when and where it's being spent, but actually the money for those bespoke agreements that the county have signed up to goes straight to the county council, and one of the things we're very conscious of is trying to make sure that we have enough information from the county about how they're monitoring the use of their funds as well.
Who would the developer come back to then? Would they come back to you as the planning authority, or to Surrey?
If
they felt the money wasn't being
if
spent?
they've paid, because the money never comes to us on those agreements, so the money would go to Surrey County Council. So if there's a clawback clause, I would have thought they'd be clawing it back from the County Council. But we have to maintain an overview of these things, because obviously it's the development, the agreement's linked to a development this council's granted planning permission for, so we need to be aware of that. But
I think you could potentially put some responsibility onto them to give you some feedback.
Okay, I think we've made that point. I think you've probably taken it. Do you want to come back?
Just very quickly on the other point, I would rather hope, Beth will reassure me, I'm sure, that when officers are providing pre-app or determining out the application, that they take into account the context of the surroundings, whether it's urban or rural, and that's part of the consideration. So hopefully that is the case, but I know your concerns, and we'll stress that. We'll stress that to officers. Because, as you say, there's very different considerations in terms of character of an area, and context is so important in all planning decisions.
And just go back to what Councillor Townsend said about design statements, because, you know,
Yes.
some of us don't think farming is one amorphous lump. We think it's,
No.
you know, a delightful mix of settlements. Councillor Townsend?
Just one tiny little thing, I have to agree with Councillor Great saying that the new system monitoring the Section 106 and SIL is much, you know, it's brilliant, and I don't know whether it would ever be possible, but it would be amazing to be able to see something like that for all the conditions as well attached to the applications, to see when they were completed and, you know, which ones are still outstanding, especially on the big sites, because some of the big sites where they phase them, it becomes really, really difficult to find. You have to go across several different applications. Is it in the outline? Is it in the list? You know, so whether or not that will ever be done in the, you know, in the wish list, but you know, it is difficult for a councillor then obviously to find that information out.
It's certainly not beyond the wit of man. I think it just
No,
really
it's-
depends on our
Yeah.
systems. I mean, I'm so new that I'm not even sure how we log the previous authorities. There would be a tick box that once on the database where that condition be discharged, that you would tick that off and that would produce the letter that discharges that. There's no reason in reality why that couldn't become made public on the website, but I think it's probably a step too far for me at the moment.
Just
but
say
it's
it
something
was
to look
on a
at.
wish list for the
Yeah.
future.
If you're all in agreement, can we move on and give Zach a break and move on to the next service plan? So who have we got? Is it you, Richard, next?
Thank you, Chair. Environmental services covers a wide range of activity across the authority. The service plan there has a significant amount of detail in it. I wouldn't propose to go through all of that detail. The key areas of work are environmental health around food safety, health and safety enforcement in the private sector to ensure food businesses are up to scratch and none of you are poisoned by any food you eat from them. Environment protection, which is about the environment, it's about noise, it's about air quality, and I'll pick that up in more detail in a moment. Environmental services is our waste management contract team. We managed a new contract with BIFA, and I'll talk a bit about that shortly. The parking services team, who operate and manage the our off-street car parks for us. The emergency planning officer and the team to support us in the event of an emergency and to respond to emergencies in support of the emergency services. Recent example was the almost flooding we had a few weeks ago, just before Christmas, where everything was kicking into action. All the plans were activated to be ready for that. Corporate health and safety, we have responsibilities to staff, to visitors to the buildings, to our employees. The licensing team, not part of this committee's remit, but I'm responsible for the licensing team as well. The environmental enforcement team, this is the joint enforcement initiative and the environmental enforcement team around tackling fly tipping, dog fouling, littering, that sort of thing, but working with other teams in other departments, enforcement teams around unauthorised encampments and things like that as well. And then last but not least, the sustainability manager and all the work that's starting to go on around the climate emergency. So that's a very brief overview of the range of services that my team covers. In terms of key challenges, and I'll focus on the key challenges for the next 3 years. If anybody wants to ask specifics about any of the items in the plan, I'm happy to deal with that. But if I work through those, we'll be here for quite a long time. So the key challenges that we have over the next 3 years, certainly around air quality, and Councillor Edmonds is well aware of this. We produce an annual status report setting out what the air quality in Waverley is. We published that in 2019. We'll be publishing another one in June this year, and that's an annual report that goes to DEFRA, and DEFRA scrutinise that. The other key challenge around air quality in the coming year is to develop and revise the action plan, to actually start to say what we're going to do to tackle the issues around air quality. And that's where the two groups that the Chair referred to are critical. That's the Air Quality Steering Group, which has representatives of the County Council on it, the Borough Council, We invite the Highways Agency, other bodies to that as well, and certainly local members are involved in that. Beneath that, we have the Farnham Air Quality Working Group, which is a bespoke group focused on the issues in Farnham. And both of those groups have got meetings scheduled over the next few weeks to start the process again of looking at that action plan, looking at the results from previous years in the borough, and seeing what we can do to start to address those issues, along with the county council. Because whilst the borough is responsible for monitoring air quality, not all of the solutions are within the gift of the borough council. Certainly things like highway and infrastructure issues, traffic issues are the domain of the county council, and they have a responsibility to cooperate with us and work towards addressing those issues. In terms of the waste contract, obviously it's a new contract. It started on the 1st of November. It's had some teething troubles. Nobody would pretend it hasn't. And one of our challenges is to bed that new service in, get the new teams out there working. There have been some changes. Food waste is now collected on separate vehicles. That caused some confusion in the community when their food waste wasn't picked up, but the rest of the rubbish was taken away. And we had a huge number of phone calls saying they've left my food waste behind. But I think people are getting used to the new arrangements now, so hopefully that's starting to bed in. In terms of what they call route optimisation, this is making the service more efficient. They've looked at garden waste collection services, and they are changing the routes for that, which means that about 1,300 people will have their collection day changed. So there'll be some publicity and communication to those people affected to explain why their collection day is changing, and to be sure that they know when their bins are due to be collected. Following on from that, there'll be the bigger route optimisation, and when the contractor was interviewed, they did say that possibly 80% of the residents in the borough will be affected by the route optimisation. That means that 80% of the residents will probably have a collection day change because they're reorganising all the routes to make them more efficient. That is a huge communication challenge for us, and we're working on a communications plan to address that at the moment. It'll be done in two phases. Firstly, the rural phase, which affects about 13,500 properties. And then the urban phase, as it's been known, where the bulk of the population live in the main concentrations of population. So it'll be a phased process between now and the end of March to make all those changes to collection rounds. So some upheaval there, but we're told it will be a much more efficient and effective service at the end of it. So we'd ask people to bear with it in the meantime, and we'll do our best to make sure it's communicated properly. With our car parks, we've obviously got the strategic review of car parking is coming to a conclusion. We have a draft report from the consultants. We need to do some work on that and meet with them next week. And that will then feed through the process of scrutiny and feed through the process of the executive to try to propose changes and improvements to the way car parking is managed. Okay, we'll look at things like where our car parks are they in the best place? Could we dispose of some of the smaller, less used ones and increase capacity in the more popular car parks? Should we manage parking by adjusting pricing structures to encourage more people to park further out of town centres, to free up town centre parking for shoppers and visitors? That sort of thing. So various ideas coming out of that at the moment, and we're working on that. And there will be a proposal for a review of parking charges to reflect some of the issues that have come up. Some of those issues around the affordability of parking for local employees, people who work in the towns can't afford to park when they come to work. So we're looking at how we can accommodate that. But at the same time ensure that the more popular car parks are kept free for visitors and shoppers and a healthy turnover of spaces. So some quite complex work going on there, which we'll bring to you at some point for you to have a look at and think about and comment on. In our car parks as well, we're installing electric vehicle charging points. We've installed them in 3 car parks so far. There's a 4th one to come on stream in Farnham soon, in Central Car Park. They're rapid charging points.
so people can charge quickly and then move on. That's what people want nowadays. And we're also looking at a possibility of solar panels on some of our car parks. And we need to do some work with our planning colleagues about the acceptability of that, but increasingly car parks are seen as large open spaces that you could put canopies over with solar panels on to generate electricity, generate income. You could even use the solar panels to charge the cars that park underneath. So lots of innovative ideas floating around the country at the moment. We need to see where we can tap in on that to promote and pursue the actions with the climate emergency going forward. Emergency planning, I referred to the almost floods before Christmas. We were ready for it, had it happened. We had the flood defence work was done along the Lammas lands last year. The flood barriers were in position, ready to be deployed at Catchall Lane, had been needed. I know Guildford did deploy their flood barriers, but we didn't have to, fortunately, this time. But the service is all about responding and supporting the emergency services in the event of a major crisis in the area, be it a flood, be it heavy snow, be it storms and winds and that sort of thing, anything that affects the community. Another example we supported was the doctor's surgery fire, where we had a background position there, looking at the community, did they need some temporary accommodation, that sort of thing, to help the emergency services. So a key service we provide there. And then of course the sustainability manager, who has a huge challenge in cajoling the rest of the council into coming up with ideas and proposals to address our carbon emissions and reduce our carbon emissions so that by 2030 we will hopefully be carbon neutral. That work is going on. We have tried to refer to the climate emergency throughout the service plan and highlight areas where we think we can make a contribution, and other heads of service and senior managers are working to identify in their areas what contributions they can make to carbon reduction within the organisation. The second challenge then is to support and help the community and encourage the community to reduce their carbon footprint as well. So quite a few challenges there for us over the next 2 to 3 years, and I'm sure we'll be talking about those in more detail at meetings in the future. Thank you, Chair.
I'm sure we shall. Thank you very much indeed. I don't really want to debate on all of those things because, as Richard says, they will be coming back. But if anybody has a comment or a question, please, John.
Just a little one. It's ES 8.2 and ES 16.2 is identical. I can see a reason you might want to put it under sustainability, but would you not refer to the same number?
Bear with me.
So that is page...
I've got it, electric vehicle charging points in the car park.
Yeah, and then look at 6.2, 16.2, sorry.
Yes.
Yes? Lovely cut and paste. Just a point.
Yeah, we'll leave you to
Yes,
sort that out. We don't need to
Can
commit
I
to
just
decision
go
on
on to
Yeah, sure.
the
No,
main
sorry,
point
John.
was the electric charging point. Please, I think it was a bit disappointing to me, sat in my first environmental ONS and talking that we got a paper about what we were planning to do, and then I turned around within 2 days and find we've actually done a contract and we've implemented the actual electric points. I mean, I think we do need to sit and monitor it, and I think you're saying it here, but the important thing is not necessarily the usage. It's the number of people who go into that car park because they've got an electric car and they can use it. And it was interesting, Sainsbury's comments, I was talking to their corporate man, and they said, we've really got no justification per se to put the electric charging points in, especially at the moment, but it does mean we're a destination. And I think that's important to the situation there. A lot of local people will use their own electricity to get in there, but they'll feel comfort if they've got it. So don't just take usage as a measurement. If you could find some statistics of how many electric cars are going into our car park, it would also help.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting point. Councillor, sorry, did you want to come back?
I think the whole issue of electric vehicle charging is an interesting one, and it's evolving rapidly. Part of the thinking now is that as the range of electric vehicles increases, it's less likely that people will want to top up their vehicle charge during the day. And once an electric vehicle has a range of in excess of 200 miles, most people will be able to do their daily routines without needing to top up the vehicle in between, and will be able to charge overnight at home. So there is a theory that we need to put in lots of charging points for the public in our car parks. The other theory is that actually, over a period of time, people won't need to use them because the range of their vehicle is sufficient to do their daily routines without topping up during the day. And then we could end up with lots of charging points that are never used. So it's a rapidly evolving industry, and we need to watch it carefully and take some steps to offer the facility where we can within reason, but also ensure that we don't invest huge amounts of money in charging points only to find that they're not needed and not used.
I mean, that's been an ongoing sort of debate that we've had in other fora.
Yeah.
Councillor Edmonds?
Yes, a quick question. Surrey's got an air pollution strategy 2016 that commits to working with boroughs. It's got some suggestions in there like the enforcement of parking and encouraging the use of public transport. Do we engage in those issues?
Yes, and through the Air Quality Steering Group, the County Council will attend that meeting. Mike Goodman, the lead member at the County Council for the Environment, actually co-chairs that meeting with our lead member.
Okay.
So they're engaged in that process with us through those steering groups.
Fair enough, thank you.
Councillor Townsend?
Thank you, Richard. Just as with the other service plan, it would be really helpful if there were some targets within that. I mean, some of yours are really great, and you've got 85% targets or 90% and things all around the place. It would be really helpful on some of them, like where you say about reducing emissions. There's no percentage, so you're going to change the routes which will reduce the emissions, but we've got no idea whether that will result in 20%, 10%, 5%. So it would be really helpful to have that.
Sorry, is that on the route optimisation?
Yeah, there's something on there about reduce emissions, but it's...
I have got some figures for that from BIFA, so...
It would be just really helpful to, I mean, not obviously, as John said earlier about the KPIs, obviously not listing all the KPIs, but perhaps the ones that these particular points are addressing, it would be really helpful to have.
Yeah.
And then one thing which is slightly picky, sorry, it's just that where it says reference any additional resources, it would be good across the service plans if that was standardised, the column, because some of them say none, and some of them say existing resources, which obviously isn't extra resources, but it does help if you are then, when you are going through, if you are using Excel and you're running through, and as you said earlier about filtering, it's really helpful if there's a standard response for things, because then you kind of know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, it's a little bit picky, and it doesn't refer to you per se, it just refers to using a standardised kind of approach within that.
Yeah, Louise is writing a note, I noticed that. Right,
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on? Is everybody else indicating? Thank you, Richard. And the best of luck, because heck of a lot of challenges there. So Matt, over to you and green spaces and trees.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just briefly run through and then answer any questions at the end, if that's okay. So similar to Richard's, we've got a brand new grounds maintenance contract that started on the 1st of November. So our task will be ensuring it delivers the performance that we require, and that they'll be in a good position in 17 months' time to be hopefully paid their incentive payment for delivering a well-performing contract. Next on the service plan is raising the profile of the Parks and Countryside Service. So really that's about telling residents and the councillors all the work that we do out there and obtaining external recognition for the management and maintenance of our sites. Next is ensuring our green space infrastructure meets the current and future demands. So we need to seek reasonable financial contributions towards infrastructure improvements. That links to local development and the local plan. And also something that's quite new is putting ourselves in a position where perhaps with new developments we can have an interest in taking on the management maintenance of green spaces on those developments rather than traditionally going to other organisations. So I know that's something Waverley's not really done before, so that'll be interesting. We'll see lots of conversations with our planning colleagues over that in due course. Next on the list is really minimising the risk of exposure to claims or potential claims associated with all the trees that we manage across the borough. We've got a large land holding, and we're probably all aware we're quite a wooded borough, so there's lots of trees out there that do need active maintenance, management and tree risk inspections to ensure that we keep the public and property safe from any potential defects. We also have to deliver our biodiversity obligations, so our ranger team plays a large part in managing many sites for conservation purposes. And kind of, well, linked to climate change is we're going to write a biodiversity policy and action plan, setting out how we're going to, openly setting out how we're going to achieve improving biodiversity in the borough over the next few years. As mentioned, we've got lots of woodlands, so we're delivering woodland management plans that set out a specific way that we'll be managing our woodlands to ensure they're well managed and indeed safe. We also provide lots of outdoor sports facilities around the borough, so we have a playing pitch strategy that council adopted a few years ago, last year. So we're charged with delivering that, so ensuring our own sports facilities meet the demands and future demands from our sports clubs, but also working with other sport facility providers to ensure that they can meet our playing pitch strategy. And that also links to getting some infrastructure contributions from local developments as well. We're doing similar with playgrounds, so we've got lots of playgrounds in the borough, and there's lots of other playgrounds managed by town and parish councils or other organisations. So we have a play area strategy that covers that area of work, and we're about to embark on reviewing and updating our current play area strategy. Next is making our green space assets work for the council, and also hopefully promoting Film Waverley, so making the borough more friendly for filming companies, and hopefully increasing some of our income and boosting the local economy by attracting in some of the big budget films that do occur. Then directly linked to climate change is promoting tree planting in the borough, so we'll be writing a tree planting policy and an action plan on how we're going to increase trees around the borough, particularly on our land, and also how we'll work with other partner agencies and the community to deliver that. Pesticides, we're currently drafting a pesticide policy with a view to phasing out wherever possible the use of pesticides within the borough. So we hopefully have a policy to come back to Environment Scrutiny Group in a few months' time. That has quite big implications for the council in terms of our approach to it and the costs involved with alternative products to pesticides. And then we've got team projects, so we've still got the Heathland Hub at Frensham Great Pond that we'd like to deliver. That's been ongoing for a few years. We have all the necessary consents in place. We just now need to find the budget to deliver the project. We've been unfortunately unsuccessful in several external funding applications, but we're still trying. And then lastly, but not least, is the provision of a green space strategy for the council, which we currently don't have. Really that will be looking at all the green spaces in the borough owned by the council or other parties, and having a strategic approach to their management and maintenance, but also heavily linked to the local plan as well. So obviously new developments have a great bearing on green space provision in the borough. And that's about it.
Thank you. My first thoughts about all of this is, let's join it all up, because I started this morning at the Farnham Biodiversity Action Plan group, who are working on an action plan, and of course it's the green infrastructure, the blue infrastructure. It's not just any one particular space, it's the tapestry, whatever you call it, of all mosaic of all the different spaces and the connectivity between them. So when you're doing all these documents, you know, I mean, they've all obviously got to work together. And you brought in the local plan, because the one thing I remember Martin and I saying right at the beginning of this, the one thing we want to do is that everything we do in this borough improves the environment. You know, obviously you are, you know, very much at the forefront of this, but it comes through planning and it comes through environment department as well. So, you know, it's important that all of this gets joined up. And I do agree about your low profile, because you do fantastic work, and, you know, those of us that work with you know it, but, you know, probably don't give you the credit publicly that you deserve. And I think if people knew that Waverley cherishes its green spaces, then, you know, they would get more enthused about sort of rolling their sleeves up and giving you a hand occasionally. Does anybody have any questions or statements? Councillor Gray? All right, we'll just go down the line, right?
Okay. Yeah, a couple of points. I mean, I'm very excited by your idea that you would like to manage some more of these development spaces, because I don't think it's particularly well managed at the moment. I think also that there's profit in there, because I think that they're charging far too much and delivering too little. Perhaps you could start with Dunsfold Park, and that will give you the quantum.
Yes, it's a very exciting prospect in Dunsfold Park.
Yes, and including what they're doing now with the tree management, and I presume that they're inputting to that petrobilling report for the area around. Just go back on the managing the green space. It's green space and green views. There are some important views and aspects, and this is coming out in the local plan, and I presume other people are having it. And these are views usually towards a house, event or church. We don't always control the land, but then it is an important view for the local community. It can include, I mean, if you take a very small example, Dunsfold, where you've got the common there, which we've got 80 acres. There's probably another 20 acres around that, which is quite important in terms of what the look and feel it makes to the area. So perhaps it could encourage you to look at that. Thank you.
Councillor else? Yes, just go down the line, because you all indicated. Yeah.
So I'm very concerned about the impact of tree pests and diseases in the borough, and that is quite a scary subject, really, I think. So you say you're going to prepare the council for the impact. Is this going to be a huge financial impact, or what kind of impact do you expect it to be?
I think a lot of it's about awareness of what's potentially coming in the future and how it will affect the sort of treescape in the borough. There are financial implications to dealing with oak processionary moth or indeed ash dieback, which we're currently dealing with. I mean, with ash dieback, the costs we're spending quite a bit of money at the moment, but it will tail off very shortly, because most of the ash trees will be dealt with and no longer alive. Oak processionary moth is a bit more difficult. We know it's coming, it's already in the borough, and it potentially could sort of increase exponentially. And then really we're looking at a risk-based approach to dealing with the nests and the impacts that the hares and these caterpillars have on public health and animal health. So it's a hard one to quantify. We may be shutting off areas, preventing public access, or we may have to be actively removing nests and trees, and we may have to keep doing that year on year. Nobody quite knows yet how it will play out. So there are potential significant impacts, but they may reach a level and then again tail off as well. We're not quite sure at the moment. So really, it's about raising the awareness of what could occur, and of course there's future pests and diseases beyond those two that I've mentioned.
There's another one that
There's
nobody
Zayella.
told me anything about.
There's probably a lot, and probably a few more out there as well. So yeah, the trees are going to be taking a bit of a hit. Zayella.
Zayella, what's that going to attack next?
Lots of different trees, so it's not just to one species. So.
It's a big subject, it's a big issue, and it's really important.
Well, yes, and of course, yeah, trees are almost like the lungs of the planet, aren't they? So we need to be very careful, and there'll be a strong link there with the tree planting policy about selecting the right species that we'll plant and do succession planting to ensure that we don't have sort of monocultures that are completely wiped out by certain
And
pests.
how are the elms doing
So-
in Farnham? You've planted some disease-resistant elms.
Oh, the elms, yes, they're still surviving at the moment.
Yeah, so we're sort of constantly looking for disease-resistant.
Yes.
Can I just say one more thing, Chairman, please? Well, two actually. It was about the filming. So it's outcome 16, and this is something that's been spoken of for quite some time now. And I think that what might be helpful is if you put, I know you have a lead officer, the Green Spaces contract officer, yourself, but you also need to be working with planning really closely there on filming.
Yes.
And I'd like to see that indicated here so that we can sort of keep an eye on that and see how planning are going on, because there are a lot of breaches of planning law occurring, and the filming is very often over and done with before the planning application is even approved.
Okay.
And that is what we really should be working together on, I think.
Second point?
It was just about the volunteers. I know about the wonderful work you do. We're going to seek to increase participation, and I don't understand the impact. If you could just explain that, I'm probably being dim. Site management decreases along with condition. What does that mean? It's 12.2.
Oh, okay, the impact of not completing the, so we rely heavily on volunteers to help
Yes.
manage the site and deliver some of the key work. So if we're not maintaining adequate levels, it's potentially the condition of the site can decrease and degrade by not being able to deliver those tasks. The alternative would be to spend money, but of course with tight budgets that may not be possible.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. It's a bit shorthand. I was being dim. No, I was being dim. Thank you.
Councillor Edmund?
I have two questions. Are there any potential sponsors for tree planting?
I'm hoping so, yes. What I'm hoping to do, there may be potential crowdfunding opportunities. And I think, by working with the community, that's something I think they'll really get behind. I think there's certainly potential, and indeed going to companies as well, because they will all be wanting to sing their own green credentials with tree planting. So if we've got suitable land available, that's definitely something we'll be exploring. So, but what we want to do with the whole point of the policy is having a structured approach to tree planting. So we want to spend a bit of time, not just rush into it, audit all of our sites, see what's possible, and then when we, no doubt we'll get requests to do tree plantings, we'll have a structured approach rather than doing it ad hoc.
Sorry, the other question was about incentive payments. They need to be very well designed,
Yes.
otherwise you potentially lose money.
Mhm.
So I hope you take that on board.
Oh, for the grounds maintenance
I've really
contracts,
had
yes.
many problems with incentive payments.
Yes, we've got to be very transparent with it, because the contractor will definitely want them. So if we're not fully paying them a payment, or not paying at all, we'll have to have a real justifiable reason for doing so. So yes, robust monitoring and performance monitoring.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks very much. We'll follow the line. Thank you, Ruth. Councillor Reid.
I was just gonna-
Councillor Townsend.
Sorry, thank you,
Yeah.
Chair. I was just going to say the same thing about targets. It would be really handy to have some of those written into the service plan. And I'd like to thank you for all of your work that you've done in Cranley as well, and keeping our common looking absolutely amazing. And with your biodiversity policy, which is CS 12.2, and it says reference any additional resources. I presume that will be, in a way, it does seem to dovetail quite a bit into planning and LPP2, so I would imagine that it does, perhaps there's a bit of extra resources required, perhaps there. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
My concern is, because I'm involved in the climate change advisory group, on the use of pesticides, and you seem to think, I got the impression that you thought that might be an expensive task.
Potentially, yes. If the alternative products at the moment to deliver the same level of control, it is quite expensive to deliver that same level of control of weeds. But there's a few options there to consider whether we want the same level of control or whether
Yes, I
we
was
choose
just
a
going to
different
say
approach.
that,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that's why I mentioned it.
Yes,
Basically.
and also there'll be an implication, a financial implication, because obviously there has to be a lot of education involved and
Yes.
publicity,
Yes.
because not everyone wants wildflowers in their villages.
No.
We had a case in Cranley actually.
Oh, they're all over, don't worry.
But I can understand that. But there's a big. I mean, I think we should put a great emphasis on getting rid of pesticides.
Yes.
That should be the priority.
Anybody else? Right, is it a quick one, Councillor Green?
Very, very quick. Can we add to tree planting, hedge planting? Because we actually do have
Yeah,
quite a lot of things, and it's there, you're going to put that into the mix, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, really, it's
Okay.
perhaps a tree planting slightly misleading. I mean, there's a lot of link with the biodiversity policy about making habitats as well, so scrub, hedges, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, both Richard and Matt, for that. It's really interesting, isn't it? I knew it was going to be, there's just so much going on to keep our eyes on. So, if everyone's okay, can we move on to the next item? Make sure we get home before midnight. Which is Zach again, which is his planning appeals and enforcement.
Yeah, although it's referred to as planning appeals and enforcement, it's really a report about planning appeals and cost of the judicial review of the local plan, but mainly focusing on planning appeals performance and how we might look to improve that. Thank you, Chairman. I won't go through the report page by page, but effectively the report was prepared in response to council interest at the cost implications of planning appeals and judicial reviews. And we will be reporting this item to next week's Value for Money, the Scrutiny Committee as well. Really, the report sets out, introduces appeals process, sets out some of the different processes by which an appeal can be heard, then goes on to talking about the costs of those appeals. There's a section on figures for allowed appeals and the costs of those appeals. And then there's some suggested improvements, which I'll focus on, and those are set out on page 65. So I won't go into the sort of the general detail of how an appeal is made, but effectively, if anyone's upset with the decision of the council either to refuse planning permission or to grant planning permission with conditions that they disagree with, then they do have a right of appeal. There is no third-party right of appeal in the UK at the moment, or in England and Wales at the moment. I believe Ireland was running a third-party right of appeal, but it's a government decision that has been looked at throughout the years. But at the moment, it really is only the applicant who can make an appeal. The general rule of thumb: there's no fee to put in an appeal apart from enforcement appeals, and the general position is that both parties will meet their own costs in defending that appeal as applicable. But there are examples where, if either party has behaved unreasonably and a claim can be substantiated, then an award of costs can be made by the inspector. It's the inspectorate who decide whether or not an award of costs is justified. It's not justified just on the basis of you got the decision wrong. It's whether or not you've actually behaved unreasonably. You've come to an unreasonable decision in making a determination on a planning application. The reason I mention this is on page 62, I have set out the actual costs of defending appeals, both between the financial year April to March 2019 and April 2000. So last financial year and this financial year to date, and the number of appeals. You'll see they're not insubstantial costs to us in terms of defending appeals. So in 2018-19, total legal costs to us were around £105,000. So that, plus expert witness costs and one appeal where costs were awarded against us for unreasonable behaviour. So you're looking at £127,000 of council taxpayers' money. And then 2019 to date, we have a similar figure of around 120. Interestingly enough, that's 2 appeals where costs have been awarded against us for unreasonable behaviour, amounting to around £53,000. I would say that, and I've set this out in the report, but traditionally we've been advised, or we've taken a view as a council, I understand, that we won't necessarily pursue costs against the other party on the basis that, you know, it could be seen as confrontational, but my view is slightly different. I think if there is unreasonable behaviour demonstrated by any party, and we feel there's a strong case, and obviously we won't do it in every case, and certainly not on matters which are entirely subjective, but there are clear cases where appellants do behave unreasonably. And my view is actually we should be challenging that. It's not a costly thing to do. Basically, you write a statement as to why you believe the behaviour has been unreasonable, and you submit it to the inspector. They have an opportunity to respond to that, either at the hearing or inquiry, or in writing, and then the inspector make a decision. But personally, that's my view, and I'd welcome, you know, I'm seeing a lot of nods around the table. Perfectly.
Yes,
you know, I think we, you know, at the end of the day, given the costs that we're facing and the shrinking budgets, I think it's something that we should certainly investigate. The other area that is not really drawn out in here, but I would like to just raise, because a couple of members since I've been here in the last 4 weeks have mentioned it to me, is there seems to be an increasing pattern of, so there are 3 means of appeal, written representations, which is simple exchange of statements. That normally is reasonably cheap for us to run, obviously there's officer time. Informal hearings, again, it's officer time, and you may bring specialists along with you, and you may need to get some specialist advice. And then inquiries, which tend to be your bigger cases, more complex cases. It's the inspectorate who decide which process it goes down. There is an increasing instance of informal hearings, which are meant to be roundtable discussions. They're not meant to be evidence being questioned on oath and expert witnesses being cross-examined, but there is a key where a lot of appellants are bringing counsel to informal hearings. I know that there is a view amongst certain members that I've talked to that we need to fight fire with fire, i.e. by taking our own counsel along. But the first point I would make is that it's not meant to be an adversarial process, the informal hearing. It's meant to be a discussion. The inspector should be managing it as an informal discussion. Whilst an appellant, we can't stop an appellant from bringing their own counsel, an inspector should be making it clear if it moves into the realms of people being cross-examined. I believe it's the inspector's role to make that point. And actually it's for officers to, if they feel they're being cross-examined unfairly and it's not part of an informal hearing process, they should politely mention that to the inspector. I'm reticent, mainly on budget grounds, to take a counsel to all informal hearings because it shouldn't, as I say, it shouldn't be necessary. Having said that, there may be the odd occasion where there's an informal hearing where it is of strategic importance and could affect policy, and obviously we would take that on a case-by-case basis. But I just wanted to raise that with the ONS and get a general view on that, because 1 or 2 members have said to me that they attended a hearing, the other side had a counsel who was very vociferous. That doesn't necessarily, just because they brought a counsel, doesn't necessarily work in their favour. The inspector may actually see that as confrontational. But so that was one question. Maybe I'll stop there for a second.
Yeah, there's certainly be others, I'm sure. I don't want to home in on the cost, simply because that's not really the remit of this committee, and it's really the quality of decision making and therefore the case we make. But just one point on your QC. We had one in this very room. They brought in a QC, and he started off by saying, I hope you don't mind my being here, and I hope you don't mind if I sum up at the end. And in fact, I just couldn't stop myself. I said, well, I mind, and I'm sure the rest of the room minds, and we shut him up. How dare he? He was the first one that I'd come across. It was Sasha White, wouldn't it be?
It's become
and I thought, it was cheeky so-and-so. But yeah, I mean, that is something we look at. I think you've got enough nods for costs. Yeah. I don't think you need to debate that. I think we all think if the appellant's being unreasonable, we should go for it. So can we look at it from the point of view, because I think this is what we're interested in really, why we overturn, why
Yep.
we make weak cases at appeal, you know, and that's something I think this committee wants to address. And one thing I remember Martin doing some research when we felt the environment wasn't sort of being well enough talked about in normal planning, we suddenly realised the policies are there, but not stressed. You know, we seem to stress certain policies, and then we go into an appeal, and they're arguing on, you know, a point of sort of landscape or biodiversity, which we haven't even touched on. And they bring in obviously somebody who can back their case up. So we all know that developers are very clever and will look for anything to attack us on. It doesn't, you know, whichever they can find, including obviously housing delivery at the moment. But, you know, the more strongly the case we make, and that goes back to getting the local member in at the beginning so that you get all the whole story, we then, working together as members and officers, shouldn't have the number of overturns we've got at the moment, because we should have come to a sort of an arrangement, an agreement before that point. So I think, to me, it's from this point of view, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from this committee's point of view, we want to see better, robust reports, decision making, and therefore when we get into the appeal, you know, our case has already been half made, as it were. Does that all make sense?
Yes, it makes absolute sense, and actually, you know, to be fair to committees, you know, we can't possibly lay the blame fully at overturns. I mean, there is evidence that perhaps overturns haven't helped in terms of statistics, but certainly, you know, it's a democratic process, and that's not, you know, I couldn't hand on heart say that's the only reason, you know, and that's why we've got some suggestions. I just want to sort of touch on the analysis, as you say, rather than looking at the costs. Let's look from page 63, so 3.13 on, which is figures for allowed appeals. So over the last, let's say, nearly 3 years, so it's April 2017 to now, we've determined there have been 244 appeals and around approximately 40% allowed. I just wanted to give a bit of context, perhaps not drawn out in here, is that the government statistics show that on average for local authorities, the success rate tends to hang around the 30% level. So we're underperforming, you know, certainly in that regard. And it's traditionally been around 30%. Well, since I can remember, it seems to be that, and that was often the targets that were put in. I don't remember if you remember the best value targets that we used to put forward, and most of the authorities I worked for had a target of not more than 30% of appeals allowed. It's slightly higher for majors appeals. It's over 40% nationally for appeals on major applications. I think that might be reflective of the fact that there's often more issues involved, and it can come down to then partly committee decisions, but partly the fact that normally there will be a number of issues, and that can lead to sort of more detail, more inquiries. And inquiries, actually, there is higher success of appeal at an inquiry than there is on written reps or an informal hearing. The agents know that, and that's why agents push for inquiries quite often, particularly in more affluent areas such as this and the rest of the parts of the southeast. But yeah, so I mean, the starting point is we have to put our hands up and say we're underperforming in terms of appeals. There are various reasons for that, which are set out in here, and we've identified some common occurring themes. And two of the key ones where there's area of disagreement relate to elements of subjectivity, well, particularly the visual amenity side, but I think that comes back to the service plan on the previous agenda item, if I may, and things like looking at design statements and having robust supplementary planning documents in place, and a consistency of approach as well, and certainly Beth and her team and I are working on that. Additionally, with neighbour impact, slightly less subjective, but there are issues that one man's meat is another man's poison type thing, in terms of we don't set hard and fast rules because there's an element of harm and demonstrating that harm. I know some authorities who have gone down the like for instance, we will informally apply a 45-degree rule in terms of overshadowing of windows, and a 25-degree rule, I believe it is, on the vertical plane. That's right, isn't it? So 45-degree horizontal, 25 on the vertical. But there are instances where that doesn't lead to such harm as to warrant refusal. Some authorities have gone down the line of just almost planning by numbers and refusing those applications, and they've come a cropper. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage us to, to look at that. But we need to train our officers properly to assess impacts on neighbouring properties. So in terms of suggested improvements, we've already introduced a quarterly appeals analysis at the Joint Planning Committee, and the idea is that we're challenged on those, and that I'm certainly someone who has come in with an open mind, and I'd like to be challenged on our performance, because I'm very keen for us to get better, and so I welcome that, and we're proposing now to take quarterly reports also to the area committee, so that they have an equal opportunity to analyse and perhaps discuss key areas where decisions have been gone against us, and the reasons why, and analysis. I must admit, I'm going to pass to Beth very quickly just to ask if we actually print up a summary of the inspector's decisions, or is it just the statistics? Because I have at previous authorities actually gone through the key considerations and actually done a very bullet point analysis, and that can be really helpful for members as well.
Yes, and thank you, Chairman. Certainly, that is what we always used to do. It has tailed off, but we are looking to resurrect that and also report it to the Joint Planning Committee, so that members
Really good.
can see the outcome.
Thank you. And equally, I know our meetings are always long, and people don't want to, I'm not somebody who wants to add to the burden, but I think that if there are particular lessons that can be learned, particularly from those cases either where we've been unsuccessful on appeal, or where costs have been awarded. But I think it's also good to point out those appeals where we have defended, and particularly there will be occasions where members go against an officer recommendation and it's upheld. And I think there's lessons for both sides. It's not just about members; it's about officers learning as well. So that analysis hopefully will improve. We touched upon the pre-application advice process, and we'll be looking at a protocol for better involvement of ward members at the at the appropriate stages to avoid inappropriate involvement or questions. I mean, quite often things can be ironed out before we even get to a committee, and I think early involvement will be crucial for that. Obviously, we need to make sure that we don't fetter a member's opportunity to make a decision at an independent decision at a committee. But as you say, you're well versed enough to know what you can and can't say. And I believe, just as an aside, Councillor David Beeman was intending to send around the latest guidance from PAS. I think has he sent that on probity and planning, and that's not just for officers, members. That's for officers as well. And I think that if I can encourage anyone to have a good read, that's a pretty short, snappy read, and it's got some really good stuff in it. Planning committee structures, I don't want to go into this here, but certainly we are, but it's not the appropriate position. We will be coming back to members, for views on that, but certainly we will be looking at our planning committee structures, whether or not we can make better use of our members. I likened it to, perhaps using your Rolls Royce to pop down the corner shop. You shouldn't really do that. The member decision should really be focused, in my mind, on those areas which absolutely need that sort of that input from the elected members who can speak for their constituents. There are quite a lot of applications which are so minor but come to committee for reasons like the office, there's a relation of the agent isn't related to the office or whatever, and I think we can probably look at that, and that's touched on in 3.29 about looking at the revised scheme of delegation, and really sending those, giving members the time really to consider applications at committee, rather than members feeling pressured by very long agendas and perhaps things being missed. But I appreciate that's going to be another discussion for another day. I didn't want to push that here, but I think that could certainly help. And allied to that is training for members and officers, and more effective training for both for members and for us officers. I know Beth is a big believer, and as is Graham, in continuous professional development and building our skills as officers. And that could be by sharing information internally, but it could be benchmarking, it could be working with other councils. So if you have a council that's got a particular specialism, so I mentioned the Surrey County Council, but equally there may be opportunities to involve things like, so I know some of the chambers, so the law chambers will come and give presentations from experts on things like gypsies and travellers, or green belt analysis, or SPAs and things like that. And I think perhaps we can utilise that more, and put together. What I'd like to do is put together a very robust member training programme, and then so finally. The final one on this was improving our committee reports. I'm not coming here to criticise, but I do need to get a handle on our committee reports and whether or not we could focus in, perhaps quieten down some of the white noise that's covering the sort of key issues that members want to focus on, so that you've got the information there, all the information there, but that it's really focusing on the key issues, and that we don't get sidetracked into issues that perhaps shouldn't be dealt with there. I mean, one example, and again, it's this is quite common at all authorities I've worked at. But for instance, when we're bringing back an application for reserve matters, I'm sure members will be aware that what we're considering is that the matters, we're not considering the principle of development again. We're just looking at specific matters. But I think sometimes that may be lost, and I think that's partly around the training and partly around officers' reports being more robust and clearer.
Giving us the conditions that were put on as outline, otherwise we are all asking
yes,
all the time.
Exactly, and I think at my first joint planning committee where I spoke, I did mention, and we've already introduced that, so for any reserve matters applications that come forward in future, the outline decision notice will be there. Because one example was, there was a question about the voltage of the electric charging points. If we'd had that there, we could advance. Well, you wouldn't have even had a question because it would have been there to also see.
Yeah.
So and I think we're, I'm learning, and Beth's learning, and we're all, we can improve committee reports and presentations so that members have more time to really focus in on the key issues. Finally, it seems a bit. I feel a bit bad. It seems a bit lost in the rest of the report, but we were asked to just come back with an indication of the costs of
we'll get to all that next week.
Local plan judicial review.
Yeah.
The spend to date is around the £105,000 mark. There are some invoices outstanding, but I have talked to our team, a service accountant, and they're very minor ones. So let's say between 105 and 110,000. We have received £20,000 back from CPRE Surrey in terms of the costs awarded against them in terms of the Court of Appeal and High Court. There is a further £30,000 from anticipated from POW campaign, Protect Our Waverley Campaign Limited.
A little bit of it.
Yeah, obviously we're currently in communication with them, their legal representatives, regarding the £30,000 due from them. And watch this space.
Gosh, thank you. I don't really want to discuss this. We've noted it, Zach is if you want to talk further, but we do have Graham here to talk about local plan part 2, and I really think unless there's something absolutely ready, we ought to move on. But thank you very, very much indeed. I do wish you all the best. I mean, picking this up is not easy. Yes,
just
very quick point.
Observations.
Yeah.
We're getting advised not to defer, and we go into rejection when the issue is really going back to the developer and having a look at the plan. But there's been a historic situation, to some extent by Carol and with her influence, but basically I think we should look at that, and we should need some advice from the planning people in terms of how we manage that. The second thing is that I'm getting awfully frustrated with the call-ins. I mean, what are relatively insignificant local call-ins, I'm talking at an area level. I've just had I don't know whether I had to fight with the officer, I've said, no, I'm not going to call it in. And she said, well, there's 14 objections. No, I'm not going to call it in because I don't think it's an issue and it can go to delegation authority. So can we just watch that?
Can we not discuss it? I really do think we ought to move on, but I'm sure Slack's taken the point, and
thanks for that.
we do
happy to discuss offline.
Yeah, I think that's the best to do that. Graham, before you pass out, would you like to move on to the next thing, local plan part 2, which we've been asking for a long, long time? So over to you.
Matthew Ellis is here as well, who's the team leader for the local plan and planning policy team. So hopefully, if you have any questions after I've just run through where we are, either Matthew or I'll be able to help you on that. What I want to do is just give you a fairly brief overview of where we are with local plan part 2 at the moment. Just taking a step backwards, and apologies if you're aware of this already, but clearly there is a link between part 2 and part 1. But in essence, if you look at it, part 1 is the strategic plan, sets up the sort of key headline policies and so on, and part 2 sort of then feeds into that. It's amplifying some of the policies. There are some areas, for example, where part 1 says this particular landscape designation is really, really important, but part 2 will detail exactly where the boundary is going to be. It's those sorts of levels of detail. And the other thing is to recognise that part 2 then sits alongside neighbourhood plans as well. I mean, that's an important thing, because the neighbourhood plans will be part of the development plan, and I'll come on to site allocations in a moment, but there is part 2 will be a little bit of a patchwork plan for reasons that I will explain. Part 2 will, the intention is it will replace a lot of retained policies, so members will know probably in your decision making on things you're still getting references to 2002 local plan policies, and they're being considered alongside local plan part 1, and in some cases, for example, Farnham neighbourhood plan policies as well. But the idea is that when part 2 is finished, there won't be the need for us to refer to any more retained policies from the 2002 plan. The part 2 itself has already been through an issues and options consultation, a preferred options consultation, and in fact this is the agenda for an ONS committee meeting towards the end of 2018, which was a first draft of the sort of pre-submission plan. So there's a lot of work being done on part 2, and just to give you a feel, and obviously it includes key development management policies. There are, in this version, over 34 development management policies proposed. The approach we've taken, obviously, and the work we're doing at the moment, is to build on areas that still needed to be resolved. And I think the important point there is that the decision was made, particularly on the back of comments that an earlier ONS committee had made about what was coming through part 2, that we needed to do some more work. And those areas of work at the time that were identified were particularly around site allocations in a couple of areas. So I said a moment ago that part 2 is only doing some site allocations. The position is that because of the neighbourhood plans doing allocations in other parts of the borough, particularly in Cramley, in Farnham, and some of the villages as well, and in those areas where we don't need to make allocations, that's left us really for part 2 with Godalming, Hazelmere and Whitley Parish, including Milford. Godalming, I think, has already met its target anyway, probably without the need for us to put allocations in, so that leaves Hazelmere and Whitley, and that might seem as though it's a bit of a simple task, but actually that's one of the real reasons why the committee previously were concerned about some areas, and we were asked to do some more work, and particularly to work with the local parish councils and the local councillors. That work started before the elections, but obviously it's continued on because we've got a new administration, and in some of those areas, new councils as well. So Hazelmere Town Council, some of you may have seen, and it was headline news in the paper, I think, before Christmas, have made some new pronouncement that essentially was a change of their position on things like the settlement boundary and greenfield releases and so on in Hazelmere, because that was a new decision that Hazelmere Town Council had made. So we are obviously tasked with liaising both with our own local councillors in those areas, but also the town, relevant town and parish councils. And that's why one of the key areas of work that's still outstanding is bottoming out where we are with site allocations in those 2 key areas. And I don't really want to go into the specific details of that because obviously lots of individual sites concerned, but we are still working on that, and rest assured we are working try to work closely with those towns and parishes as well. Another area of work that Part 2 is covering is gypsy and traveller allocations, and there's some issues there we're sort of bottoming out in terms of sites, particularly about deliverability of sites and so on. So that's a bit of work, a key area of outstanding work. And the other area I think that was key and outstanding was in relation to these development management policies, and having another look at those policies in the context of the climate emergency and whether those policies are fit for purpose, whether there's any justification for changing those, and we are liaising with portfolio holders over that, and that's another key area of work that we're doing at the moment. So there's a lot there that we've already done on Part 2 that we don't think we need to change in terms of what we'd already developed, but there are these 3 or 4 quite key areas that are still outstanding. The process we will go through when we've resolved that will be ultimately to bring a draft plan, like we did with this agenda, back through this committee, and then it will feed its way on through to the executive and finally on to the council. So with that sort of overview, Chairman, Matthew and I are more than happy to sort of try and pick up any questions anybody might have on where we are with Part 2.
Right, guess who?
Timing.
I think all I can say at the moment is that I can't give a definitive date at the moment, but we're certainly aiming to be in a situation where we can get these matters resolved so that we're ready to go to the next stage of consultation, ideally I think before the summer. Be unlikely to go beyond that, I hope, but obviously we won't avoid any consultation around the summer period, but that's the best I can say at the moment in terms of timescales.
That's what's in the service plan, isn't it? June 20. Anybody else? Councillor Townsend?
Just a couple of things. I mean, I was quite a big fan of Local Plan Part 2 because it had quite a few environmental policies that were already there, so it would be good to see those coming forward, and also if any more policies can be put forward as well for climate change. So since we did that, have the planning practice guidance sort of become a bit more robust around climate change? Did they issue some more guidance on that? Because I know the MPP obviously has had a few updates, but the actual planning guidance has, I think, become a little bit more.
There have been some updates around that. Although interestingly, I think the other thing that the government has been reporting on recently, and I'm just thinking about the very specific area of things like energy efficiency, is a move to whether those requirements should be through building regulations, and to actually not to have a situation where you might have a standard through building regulations that says you've got to achieve this level of energy efficiency, but then Council A over here, so its planning policies requires a bit more, and this council doesn't, and and so there's a consultation at the moment about whether those energy efficiency targets should be secured by progressively tightening up the building regulations, so the government meets its targets on reductions of carbon emissions through building regulations rather than necessarily through planning. So it's a bit of a case of watch this space, but certainly some of the work we're doing at the moment is to look at both the policies that we've currently got in Part 1 and what's emerging through Part 2, and about how we best deliver it where we have got the tools to do that.
And one of the other tiny things, and I'm not sure if it was in there originally, is accessibility for like an ageing population, things that we have obviously asked for lots of times, and whether or not we'll ever get bungalows or a few bungalows, but even making them the standard for wheelchair access or whatever, whether or not we can push a percentage. I mean, I've tried to do it within the Cranley neighbourhood plan to have a small percentage of houses that can be more accessible. What is the standard again? Is it M34 or something?
We have got
standard, but I can't remember whether or not that was a percentage, but we have got an ageing population, and it is something that wasn't addressed in Local Plan Part 1. So
well,
it would
actually,
be really
one
good
of
to
those
see.
Part 1 policies does have a reference to that, and that's one of those areas where I think, picking up what the Chairman was saying earlier, we need to make sure that we are maximising the use of the tools that we already have. I don't know, Matthew, I can't remember what the precise wording was.
It was something about the requirement for that particular...
It's the basic level though, isn't it, rather than the higher accessibility level?
It wasn't
I
the
think,
highest,
from
it was the
memory.
one that was put forward again. I mean, step change in the approach to be taken. I think that's policy AHN3, but that's the approach to be taken.
Certainly we can have a look at that. I think one of the things that I don't want to sound negative here, but just one of the things we do have to be mindful of as we go forward with any plan is how policies might impact on viability, because we will be tested on that. We have a viability assessment to support Local Plan Part 1, and that included looking at all the policies we were proposing, And that also fed into how our consultants arrived at the SIL charging level. If part 2 were to start trying to add in policies that clearly had implications for development viability, then if we don't look at that and before we'll be found out at examination, because the developers will be very keen to say, have you really tested the viability of having that along with the other things you want us to do? So it's not to say we can't look at some of these things, but certainly we will make a note to have a look at the accessibility, because we've got policies around design and buildings and so on. So there may be a place to look at that alongside what we've got in part 1.
I mean, I know that London does have, but I know that's a bit slightly different because the London mayor has slightly different powers. But I know that they do set it at something like 10%. But yes, if you could, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Chairman, through you, can I just say that the last update to the National Planning Practice Guidance on climate change matters was March 2019. I think the government's had sort of other things perhaps on its mind over the last sort of 9-10 months, but hopefully it will come back on the agenda following the
environment
election.
bill should be coming through, shouldn't
exactly.
it?
And we should be hearing more about how that will be implemented.
I mean, there's a lot of movement on those, and there is a lot of movement on things like biodiversity. We're not quite there in terms of the legislation around net gain and so on.
We want to be leaders, though.
But exactly, but I think obviously I'm just saying that it's constantly changing, and that we have to just be alive to that, because at some point we'll eventually have to draw a line and say this is the plan we want to submit for its examination.
I think that's where the public always gets confused, because they always think planning is, and when you say, well, actually planning just evolves all the time, you know, they really find it very, very difficult not to have a set of rules that you just tick off, you know. Anybody else have any questions for either Graham or Matthew? I think it's really exciting. I really do want, having been in so many inquiries where they just basically dismiss it because we don't have local plan part 2. I mean, they get that out of the way straight away. Well, of course, you know, we've got to question the validity of local plan part 1. You know, you've got a shortage of sites. So build our 300 houses.
I think just on that, Chen, there's one thing to bear in mind is obviously we will do our utmost with part 2, and we just need, as I think Councillor Gregor alluded to this earlier, there are still some neighbourhood plans that are yet to reach the advanced stage. I mean, Cranley are now quite a kind of advanced stage, because I think we've got the examiner appointed. Farnham's getting close to the referendum now on the plan there, and others are moving forward quite well. We know there are a few others, but I think gradually the number of actual sites are going to be allocated that aren't in a plan somewhere is going to end up being quite small, because we're then talking about places like Elstead and Chiddingfold and Dunsfold probably are the 3 that are doing allocations, which are perhaps the least furthest down the line, but others like Alfold, again, I think they've probably met their numbers now. I'm pretty sure they've met the numbers that they need to for the plan, and Newhurst the same. So you know, we're progressing quite well on that.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? How you can put pressure on these groups, because, you know, having led a group, I mean, you know, I knew what I was doing, if you see what I mean. But with all the other groups, you know, it's very much depending on the local sort of leader or team, isn't it, to get the thing done. But I think put dates out or something.
I think what we do, and we will endeavour to do further if we can, is just to have those sessions where if we haven't heard from a neighbourhood planning group for a while, we then just politely knock on the door and say, how are you getting on? Do you need any help with anything?
Well, in that respect, I think, you know, it's nothing necessarily tangible, but a lot of the neighbourhood planning groups are working quite hard towards that. So, as an officer, I mean, yourselves might not know as much about do, but I know, for instance, they also are working very hard to get theirs ready for their next stage of their consultation. You know, that's progressing well.
Because I think what we're all worried about is any further delay. You know, we've already had a major delay on this. We know it's vital to, you know, get our development plan in place and as solid as we can possibly make it. So, you know, we'd hate to be held up. But you're right, if you can do it by default, you know, that this is when we're intending to do that. So just put a little bit of pressure, because I know what hard work it is, you know. Much harder than they ever told you.
Yes.
It's a bit like being a counsellor. Yes,
just quickly come back on. I mean, Chiddingfold have had their plan put back by 2 months because of the habitat regulation requirement, which wasn't in the original advice they were giving. I mean, Dunsfold have got 60-odd, 70% of their houses have either been built or have been applied for. All the other sites are applied. It's just a question of doing it.
Yeah.
And they're small and they were late in starting. I do think they could need some help, yeah, as to what's important and what's not. So I think they're coming along. And then I think you should set your targets that all those 3 are completed by the end of the year.
Yeah.
The most important thing is to get the houses built that have been
Oh,
got
gosh,
to the
yes.
planning permission,
Yes,
and
which
any pressure.
ties up all the discussion
Push
of
that
everything
along.
tonight, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Graham and Matthew. It's most helpful and most encouraging that we're actually going to get on with local plan part 2. So thank you very, very much. And we won't nag you until the next week it actually comes in, and then we'll have a good look at it. But we were
We're just waiting for 278 pages to review.
Well, that'll do nicely. What better thing to do? Right, can we move on then? Is it worth asking for a budget strategy update? I mean, only because we're all meeting, but Liz and John.
One statement I will make, and that's all. Basically, the report's completed. It's now available. It's going into the ONS on the 20th, and everyone can see it on it.
And all councillors have been invited to that ONS, so there's been a general invite that went round, because I think it's really important that councillors do come to that, even if, obviously, they're not a member of any ONS.
Yasmin, anything to add?
Nothing from me, no.
No.
Reports available.
So we all know it's on the 20th, and as Councillor Townsend said, we've all had an electronic invitation. I just say yes to everything, as Yasmin knows, and she sort of tells me I'm double booked, and I don't have the time. But anyway, thank you very much for looking after me. Play shaping we're not having a debate on. So on to the committee forward work programme, Yasmin.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll take you through the items I've picked up this evening to be added onto the work programme. Please point out if I've missed anything you thought was agreed to go on. So I'll start with, we've already got pesticides policy on our work programme, and as Matt mentioned, that should be coming in March. We also, we've also got the draft climate emergency action plan, so I've been speaking to Richard about having that come along to the committee as well for some scrutiny. Not on there at the moment, but I've spoken to Richard about it, and he mentioned it in his presentation, car parking review report. Obviously that's very important to the remit of this committee, so I think Richard was alluding to possibly March time as well, so I'll add that onto the work programme. And finally, local plan part 2, of course, so I'll add that one with the important caveat of timing. So it could be March or June to me. So those are the future items. I wanted just to update you quickly on the Green Spaces Strategy Working Group. So we've had a meeting of that working group. We've got another one booked for this Thursday. We're hoping also to have, also for March, to have the final report with the recommendations and the conclusions from the group on that. And so that, as a parent committee, this committee can read those and hopefully recommend them to the executive as the strategy kicks off and is written by officers. I think we've had a very full discussion this evening about the service plans, and I think it's great. All of the ONS, this committee ONS members, have attended one of the training sessions that we had in the previous week. So I'd like to request members, if they have any suggestions from the service plans in particular, because that is effectively the portfolio holders and the executive sort of forward programme for the next 3 years or so. If there's anything members would like sort of drawn out of there and put onto the work programme, please do raise that, and particularly I request at the next meeting for March time, because I plan to put the work programme at the beginning of the agenda. So we did discuss that at the training. I did make a note of that.
You want us to tell you?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Electric charging, I would like to come up September or later on, the chairman's agreement. Just have a review, but give it enough time. Yeah.
So you can see where that's at that point, and pop that onto the work programme to discuss. And I'll obviously speak to Richard about that. Coming close to the end, place shaping update. So this committee had a brilliant discussion at the last meeting about place shaping, what it is and what it isn't. And I was sent away to do some homework as to getting an external presenter to come along. So I've spoken to the portfolio holder, because it's really important we have a joined up approach to this. So there's lots of different interpretations. but the portfolio holder has really embraced that idea of an external presenter coming along. So I'm going to be making some calls, and hopefully we can get someone before the March meeting, so between now and the March meeting of this committee. And then if the committee so wishes, we could have the portfolio holder come along in March to talk about his interpretation of play shaping and what it means to the borough. But we'll see how that goes from the external presentation that we're hopefully going to have before March. And finally, you'll have seen from my email today that the recommendation, one of the recommendations this committee produced in November was about housing delivery numbers. We've already touched upon that this evening. And the outcome of that was a letter from the chair and vice chair of this committee on the committee's behalf. So that's just been sent to the leader today. So we'll await his response to that. But other than that, I have nothing else, Chairman.
And just to say, that followed on, if you remember, he and I had a meeting with the MHCLG just before, and we were saying that you've got to keep meeting and keep writing, and Councillor Townsend so saying the same thing.
Times.
Yeah, you know, we cannot let this drop because you know, we're being penalised as a borough. We're spending all this money on neighbourhood planning, which is being put aside. Why is it being put aside? You know, it shouldn't be put aside, because if you've got a made neighbourhood plan, you don't have to have a 5-year housing land supply. You don't have to have any time by which you're delivering your housing, and yet they come along to an appeal and all of a sudden we're looking borough-wide. So all of this issue, and of course the fact that the housing delivery is not in our hands. And we've just got to keep saying this, you know, so this letter is just part of that constant campaign to keep nagging, nag your MP, nag anybody, but you know, we've got to keep this going, because it's just, well, it's not working, and it, as my children used to say, it's not fair, you know. It's all loaded in favour of the developers, and you know, they've got more than enough
It's almost an incentive for developers not to deliver, so that's the awful thing. It's not just working against us, it's actually an incentive scheme.
And if I could just say, at the biodiversity meeting this morning, they were showing some metrics, I don't know whether you're aware of these, which apparently they put into an application in Farnham in Waverley Lane. And these are metrics where they're reducing biodiversity to sort of numbers based on, you know, a database. And this is just a gift to developers, because they'll just look at the number and come up with a number that's just slightly less. I mean, you know, it's everything in the system is, if you start being prescriptive and put numbers on it, developers get a clever QC or a clever consultant and work out how to get round the numbers. So it was very depressing, and it was actually the man who's head of reptiles, as it were, in Surrey, who was saying, you know, they thought it was absolutely disgraceful and was just working for the developers. So it wasn't my opinion, which is very disheartening.
Was this John? Can I ask? Was that John Edwards from Surrey?
No, it was Steve Langham, I think it's called, and he's on the board of. They don't call it reptiles; they call it something a bit longer. But you know, he's really knowledgeable. He's doing the database, and you know, he was talking about this. It's something that's come out from Natural England, and it's biometric sort of something or other number. It's a way of working out your biodiversity in any particular field at any particular time, so that you can come along and say, well, actually, I am not going to harm the biodiversity. In fact, I'm going to improve it. But of course, you know, if you use dodgy data to start with, then you're not going to be sort of telling the whole story. So
it's quite hard to calculate that net gain in biodiversity,
isn't it?
From the point of view of planning.
It's going to be difficult to achieve.
Yeah,
I know, and you know, get a clever QC or a clever consultant on the job, and given that this is a very prescriptive series of rather crude, if you like, calculations, I think we're going to have even more trouble. Anyway, I must rant on about developers. Does anyone have anything else to say before I close the meeting? Thank you. Thank you so much, as ever. Sorry.
I was just going to say, can we get back to you with any things by email for anything for the program? Because
Please
I
do.
haven't gone through it with that in mind, so I would glance through it.
Yes,
Thank you.
please do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Safe journey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.